Over the years, Microsoft has made a lot of claims. One of the most recent ones is that Windows 11 is better optimized for us gamers. Now, having used Windows 11 since day one, I can tell you that it's certainly had its share of growing pains, but according to a Steam survey, nearly 2/3 of gamers still haven't made the swap. Now, unfortunately, this decision is going to be taken out of our hands in the next year or two, as officially Windows 10 support ends in 2025. However, I ran some tests today to see if making the upgrade is worth it for those who have yet to jump ship, and whether or not keeping Windows 10 until the very last second really does make sense. Now, all the gaming benchmarks around today will have all their methodology down in the description, including hardware and testings I used. But before we dive into those, let me remind you about my giveaway.
Need a mouse this new year? I've got you covered. I'm giving away the SteelSeries Aerox 3 wireless gaming mouse, and you can learn how to enter it down in the video description below.
All right, guys, let's dive into these benchmarks, and then I'm going to go over the results. So there you have it. Now here's the thing, in all the games I tested, Windows 11 had an edge over every single title at every single resolution, as I also tested 1440p and 1080p as well. Starting off with Call of Duty, you can see a deficit of maybe about 10 to 15 FPS depending on what resolution you decide to play at. This is with no ray tracing or DLSS turned on in any of these tests, and it gives us kind of a barometer of the difference in performance. Now, one thing I noticed moving into games like Spiderman is that Windows 11 doesn't appear necessarily to be better optimized per se, even though I do believe that is the case. What it also comes down to is out of the box, it is actually pulling more wattage on the CPU and using more of the available VRAM on the GPU in whatever game I was testing. I think that this actually accounts for more of the performance difference than the Windows 11 optimizations themselves. Moving into the next title in our suite for Tiny Tina's Wonderland, this by far had the biggest deficit outside of the box, with 4K being particularly brutal against the title, showing that there was a gigantic optimization difference. Even though it wasn't using that much more VRAM or using that much more of the CPU wattage, we were still getting some pretty big numbers in terms of the difference at every resolution across Windows 10 and Windows 11. So I think this illustrates kind of the combination of Windows 11 using the hardware more efficiently and the optimizations that it's kind of gone through, and this is a more recent title, so that makes sense. Now, Cyberpunk was basically the one that was the exception to this. It had by far the lowest difference, depending on what you were doing, whether that was Windows 11 or Windows 10, which makes sense because the game, even all these months later, is still not great optimized. You need a lot of hardware to punch through and get higher frames per second, and so this, I think, gives us a pretty good idea that not every game is going to benefit in the same way, but generally speaking, 11 appears to be at least a little bit faster when it comes to games. Now, I did have a little bit of weirdness when I turned on DLSS, so I tested Call of Duty because I wanted to see again, if that was going to make a big difference, as this is a newer technology. And once again, it was getting beaten by 11, at least with DLSS turned on. However, that was true up to 1080p. At 1080p, it looked like Windows 10 was actually better able to take advantage of the optimizations and get more performance than Windows 11 was, which was kind of interesting to me. So now we're in this kind of position where basically, if you want to make the jump to Windows 11, I think there's an objective reason to do that, as the out-of-box experience is going to be better. And before you flame me, I mean just performance. I'm not talking about UI or anything like that. However, this mainly seems to come down to not necessarily optimizations as much as it is the fact that the games are just utilizing more of their available resources. So if you're, a little bit more tech savvy and you can tinker around in the BIOS, you can probably, set some new power limitations on both the GPU and the CPU, using like MSI Afterburner, for example, and get basically relatively the same performance. If you're like most gamers, not going to mess with your settings, because that's actually what most gamers do, is they don't actually overclock or do any of that, then it looks like 11 is going to be the best out-of-box experience once again if you're just talking about pure performance. Although it's not by a gigantic margin, at least not yet, so there is still more time for us who want to stay on Windows 10. And the thing I didn't talk about too is in terms of backwards compatibility, there are a lot of games that are older indie titles that aren't going to run as well on Windows 11. So if you're still kind of playing games that are maybe between 8 to 12 years old, I would absolutely wait before making the jump, as a lot of that stuff still has to be ironed out. So anyway, guys, I hope you found this helpful. If you did, leave me a big thumbs up. If it was trash, leave me a thumbs down. Remember to get subscribed, hit that bell icon so you know when these videos drop next. Remember to enter that giveaway. I don't actually know how many days are left in it. It's like a week, something like that. But anyway, enter that giveaway for that mouse if you haven't already. I'm going to keep those going every month moving into 2023. I want to build as much momentum as possible. I want to grow my channel. Help me do that by sharing this if you found it at all helpful. And as always, I'm going to see every single one of you next time here on Geared Inc.